Hello everyone. Well, today we're going to explore how we can create different effects using very minimal supplies. So we're going to be using just 3 art mixed media supplies and a couple of household items and get 5 different effects. This is all going to be for a background page in your art journal. And if you don't have a journal, that's fine. You could always just get a piece of paper, a bit of watercolor paper or some fairly, not too thin, like I think computer paper would be too thin, but something a little bit thicker than that. So I've got 5 different journals here just so I can show you the differences and also how it doesn't really matter what sort of paper you're using, that you can still do a lovely effect in even an old book. Give it a new lease of life. 1 colour paint. That's all we're going to use, just 1 colour of paint. I've got this deep turquoise. Love the turquoise colours, so that's what I'm going to be using for mine. You can use whatever colour you want. And some gesso. So I prefer a thick gesso because you can always thin it down a little bit. There's so many different gessos out there and you'll probably end up with a favourite of your own, but the thicker one you can do a lot more texturising with a thick gesso. So I feel like you're getting more bang for your buck when, if you need it thin, you can thin it down with a bit of water. And the last one is a stencil. I've got a 12 by 12 stencil here. You don't have to have one that big. It's just all over different patterns. So that's the one I'm going to be using. You use whatever you have, whatever you'd like to use. And the few household items that you'll need is something like maybe some greaseproof paper just to protect your pages, some baby wipes, a plastic knife or a palette knife, just something to get your gesso out of the bottle with, some water, mine's in a spray bottle but you could just have it in a little cup, and some masking tape, and that's all we'll need. Okay, so let's get started. Now, why do we use gesso? If we have, say, something like this book here, which is an old novel, we need to make the paper a little bit more, not water resistant, but a bit more robust so it will take the wet media, because otherwise, especially with these old books, it's just going to, you know, just fall to pieces if we started putting a lot of wet media on there, and we don't want that to happen. Even with things like these sketchbooks, they're fine up to a point. Have I got anything with wetness? Not really. But if you're going to do a lot of, this is a Moleskine, whatever you want to call it. This is only the sketch one, so it's not really made for a lot of wet media, but it's not a very thin paper, so it's not too bad, but it can tend to buckle. And even if it does buckle, don't panic, because once you shut it and it's had a bit of weight on it for a while, that buckling will become less evident. So I've got that one. I've got another one which was just a sketchbook. So anyway, that's the general idea. A bit of gesso on the beginning, on the base of the page, will help protect that page and make it a little bit more robust for the wet media. And that's why we're using gesso. Is the old book. We'll start off with the gesso. So let's take my lid off. If you have something to get that out with, that's great. I've got just got a spatula here. I'm just going to pop that onto the page, straight onto the page. Both sides. I could keep going there with that, but we're using the household item, which is the card. So I'm going to start scraping that onto the page. I'm very bad at this, but a lot of people do it, and you probably should do it, because you don't want to get paint or gesso on the other pages. So what I'm going to do is use wax paper, another household item, to stop my pages from sticking together and from transferring the paint onto the other pages. So I'll just pop that in there on one side. Okay, so we have some wax paper there. Now that one has to dry, so you can either use a hairdryer to speed that up. You can let it dry naturally, but it does take a while. So let's use the hairdryer. So now we're going to use a little bit of masking tape. You don't have to have this thick masking tape, you could have thinner. I did have some, but it's disappeared. It doesn't matter. Okay, so with this you can cut, you can tear. You don't have to wait. You could put it under the gesso. You could put it down before you put the gesso on if you want. I'm just putting on over the top. Now I'm putting it around the edges. You could put strips there, however you want. But just for now, this is what I'm doing. So if you are putting this over the gesso, you do have to make sure that your gesso is dry. And so if it's not dry, it won't work. Now the reason I'm putting this over the top of the gesso is because I'm putting paint over the top, and the paint will react differently on the tape than it will on the gesso itself. So it's going to give it a different effect and create a texture in colour and create a texture and colour. So around the edges I'm going, and you can overlap it. You could be making it really, if you had a thinner one, you could just do strip, 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 like in a nice even border. As I said, you could put like little cross sections, however you want to do it. Like you could have had a bit like that, a bit like that, just randomly over the page. I have that all around the outside edges, pushing all my corners and edges down. Okay, let's get the colour. Now I'm going to be using my fingers for this one because I like using my fingers, and start rubbing. And I also want some, where is it? Now you can dip your finger in some water, or you can dilute it down first. But you can see the difference between the tape and the page, how it's showing up just slightly different. And also, you know, the texture. Sometimes you get a little bit of a white outline, which is quite cool. So all of that's made it look quite different. Get our wax paper. Now this time when I put the gesso on, I'm going to put it on quite thick, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm not going to spread it out too thin. So I need a little bit more than we did last time. I'm even going to leave just a few bare, just little bits and pieces here and there bare. Now what I'm going to do is use my card and create some marks in there. You can see it scrapes it away there, or these ones it's just leaving like indents within the thickness of the gesso. You could also, before I go too far, to create texture, simply close the page and open it. Look at that. Doesn't that look beautiful? Okay, oops, now let's not get that in the wrong spot. Okay, I'm going to keep going with the using the card to texturize with. You can see that's getting some quite high peaks and valleys, and later on that's going to be lovely for when we're putting colour over the top. You could write letters or words in there, numbers. If you happen to have a stamp, you could stamp into it, and that would leave the indentation of the stamp. But we're just using our few supplies today, so that's all I'm going to use, and I think that looks quite cool, that texture there. So I'll leave that for now. I'll put that one aside. Now that one, because it's so thick, you can dry it a little bit with the hairdryer, but you're going to find that it's more going to form, with the thickness, it'll form like a skin over the top, and if you start working on it too soon, that skin will break and the wet gesso underneath might come through. So you might need to leave that one for a couple of hours, depending on your weather, maybe even overnight to dry properly. So this is the heavily textured page with the gesso. I'm going to make a bit of a wash with my paint. I need it to be more fluid, so I'm going to add a little bit of water just on the palette there. Mix that up a little bit. I just want it more fluid, just like that. And I'm going to get a baby wipe. If you've got an old one laying around, you can use that. Doesn't have to be wet, but making it a little bit wet. This is a dried up one that I've used before, but just going to make it a little bit wet so it doesn't soak up too much of that paint and not let me use the paint on the page. Oops, must have been a hole in there, so that's okay. We will just use that and start rubbing that around. See the little spaces where I have missed the gesso? It does take the paint just slightly different. Okay, so I'll let that one dry for a bit. Okay, so what we're going to do now is hit all of these high points with some of the white gesso. Go back with that. Now you can either, if you had a brayer, you could use a brayer. You can use your card. You can use your finger. Let's do a different couple of these just to show you. You need to tap it off so you don't have a big chunk on your finger, and then just very gently hit those high points. And see how it's bringing out a really lovely grungy sort of pattern. It's beautiful. You could also, as I said, use your credit card, just a line across there, and holding your card quite flat to the surface, just wipe it across like that. Just do a mixture of both.